So today we're going to be doing a really fun and loose rural sketch. I want to show you some really simple painting techniques that are a lot of fun but you get great results with. This is going to be very loose, this one. I'm just going to not focus too much on the construction apart from just to point out how I've picked up those lines in the perspective. You can see there's a couple of different points of perspective in this. The pylon isn't necessarily lined up perfectly in terms of its plane to the wall and the other components, but basically it all comes to a point on the right hand side. It converges there. So the pencil sketch is primarily just to designate the sort of zones, if you know what I mean. So I'm saying this house fills up this space, and over here there's another tree, and I'm basically just trying to replicate actually the drawing on the left hand side, really, which I know sounds obvious, but you're basically simplifying your reference drawing into zones. So you're saying here's a tree, here's some stonework, here's some grass or other details. So in the foreground we have this speed sign, which I'm going to make quite prominent. A lot of people would say, well, why do you want to do a picture with a sign in? But I actually think that sort of vernacular, like signs and street furniture and things like that, is very distinctive to a place. And I actually like to include things like pylons and even bins sometimes in my pictures, because like people, they can date a drawing, but they also add, I think, context, and it's just the built world around us. So the line work here. I'm using a fountain pen with some waterproof ink in. This is platinum carbon black waterproof ink, which is one of my favourite sort of go-to inks. Now, you may say, well, why do I start at the top left corner? Well, that's because I'm right-handed, so I don't want to be dragging the bottom of my hand and my little finger into wet ink, and this ink will stay wet for a little while. Obviously it depends on how warm your house is and things like that, but I always tend to work from the top left down to the bottom right. Not always, but most of the time. Now, people have asked me about how I hold the pen. Depending on what I'm actually doing with the pen, I will hold it further back. If I'm doing longer lines, I tend to try and hold the pen towards the back, and I tend to want to draw more from the shoulder rather than just using my hand. Now you can see here I'm drawing very much from the hand because I'm doing small detail, and I'll hold the pen further towards the nib. So I'm continuing to sort of zone in those areas here. Obviously I'm not being too picky about the perspective, and one of the things I wanted to do with this drawing is just to show you how loose and free you can be, especially with the painting stage. So now I've got in some of the detail towards the back of the drawing, like the house and the fields here. I'm going to start thinking about the detail in the foreground. Now, it's quite hard to sort of predict how the final drawing is going to be, but a little bit of experience will teach you that you probably need more line work to the foreground of a drawing, because that's where the contrast and the detail is going to be more present. You probably have less line work going back. And also when it comes to actually picking out details like foliage or brickwork or things like that, a little bit of playing, and you'll get an idea of just how much you want to show and how much you don't want to show. I mean, I could have gone down the route of drawing this lovely stone wall in the foreground as a very detailed, specific, toned element, but I just wanted, as I say, this drawing to be a really loose feel to it. These kind of sketches, and this speed of sketching, this would be about 20 minutes. Would typically be what I'd do in a sketchbook if I was out and about and I just wanted to do something super fast. Now I'm adding in a little bit of shading here to some of the tree in the foreground, because that is particularly dark. Now I could have just done that with watercolor, really, but what I wanted to do, now I could have done that with watercolor, but what I wanted to do is just again do a little shortcut so that I don't have to put too many layers of watercolor on. So here we've got my Daniel Smith paints, despite them being in a smink tray. Don't let that confuse you. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm wetting the whole paper. Now once that's wet, I can go in and just start putting some colour in. I'm not being too fussy about areas here, or I'm just basically choosing There's the sky, boom, put some blue up there. There's going to be a tree there that's a sort of purple colour, bash some in there. There's a green in the foliage. Again, I'm not painting in every single leaf, I'm just putting in a big splot of colour there. So because I've pre-wetted the page, and this is a very wet in wet technique, all these colours are going to mush around and do some lovely things. When it comes to putting some detail in, you know, that's when you dry this, and then you can go in with a second layer of watercolour and add some detail. So again, I'm just choosing some of these areas where I know there's going to be, you know, tones. Once I have a basic covering of colour down here, what I'll do is I'll dry this and add another layer. Okay, so you can see now that's dried and it's become slightly faded in terms of the original colours, because that's what watercolour does when it dries, is it loses a little bit of its punch. So when you're applying colour, do keep that in mind, and sometimes when it's wet it can look a little bit heavy-handed and you can think, ooh, maybe not so keen on that, but actually that's kind of what you want, because obviously when it dries it gets knocked back. So here again I'm looking at textures, and I'm thinking primarily about putting those textures into the foreground. So I've added some of the foliage, I've added some spatters, some little splashes, and then I'm going to work a bit further back and just using a tiny bit of dry brush technique there, of just brushing up with quite a dried brush. You may have noticed actually for this picture I've just used the same brush throughout, and it's a very small mop brush, and I do like doing that sometimes. It just, don't know, it feels very pure somehow. Okay, so I'm adding in a little bit of shadow just in the background there, and a little bit more texture, such as that tree up there, and that just helps tell the story of that foliage. So really, apart from the sign here, I think, you know, there's probably not a huge amount to do more, and I'm obviously having a bit of a fiddle. The other thing about walls, yes, is when you're actually drawing walls, it's always worth adding in a few more different coloured stones. So even if the wall is pretty flat one colour, if you add in a slightly darker tone to the original one, or a slightly pinker or a grey tone, depending on what's in that wall, it will really help to show the fact that it's made of bricks. So that is something that I will often do, even if it isn't actually there in the picture. So I'm starting to draw in a little bit of sort of rust colour on that poster, and then the red sign, and then I've dried that off. But as you can see here, that's pretty much most of the drawing, or a lot of the watercolour done. So I'm going to add in some thicker lines in the foreground, and again, this is a style thing. I like to do this sometimes. I like my drawings really to pop off the page. I think they can look really fun. So this double-sided sign has some shadow in the middle, so again I'm using my food pen here, or fooded pen, which is going to really help bring those really, really wide lines to life. And the food pen really helps with those wide lines. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I'm squinting my eyes a little bit, which always helps to sort of give you an idea of balance. And I'm starting to think, right, what have I forgotten? What do I need to add in? You know, what other components does this picture really need? The danger is obviously always overworking art. I think if it has a vitality and if it has a bit of a spark to it, you know you're kind of almost there. And often it's easier to put a piece of artwork down and come back to it. And a fresh pair of eyes will probably tell you that, yeah, you were right. You needed to do a little bit more, or yeah, you were right. You've done too much, or it's just perfect, or it's just right. So if you have any doubt whether a piece of art is finished, just stop. Put it on the mantelpiece to bake for 24 hours, and then come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, and you'll know. So really, I think as I'm going through this, I've realised there's a couple of details that I want to just firm up a little bit. For all that I'm trying to be loose with this, I still want to have the house read as a house. And the joy in loose art like this and loose painting is really where you have a little bit of chaos that looks super effortless, but it works really well. Now you can see here when you look closely at this, there's some bits where that bit there particularly, yeah, works really well. The top of the house, and I think the foliage is strong. And yeah, and there's enough perspective in it to get that feel that you're sort of looking down the road. I think it works really well. It's a really fun technique, and I think often people, when they work this loosely, they'll think it looks untidy, but in fact, it's got real confidence to it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you again. Bye bye.